Thanks for joining us today for this conversation with our PMBA alumna Larissa Maxwell on the benefit of an MBA program for those of you from nonprofit or governance, or typically what you would consider really as a myth as non-business backgrounds, because business is involved with everything. So I'd like to take the opportunity now for Larissa to introduce herself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your work that you do, and then we'll take the conversation from there. And I'd like to remind everyone that this is a conversation, so it's kind of a small group conversation. So if you have questions, just feel free to use the raise hand feature or input a question in the chat box as the conversation evolves, and we'd be happy to have a dialogue about anything you want to bring up. Thanks.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Larissa Maxwell. I have been working in the field of nonprofit, social transformation, and ESG for about 16 years. I am a registered clinical therapist and a registered professional leadership coach. And currently, right now, I'm honored to be a national director for the Salvation Army, overseeing some work that specifically addresses human trafficking in Canada. So that's a little bit about my background.
Okay, so Larissa, I'd like to start you off with some questions. Could you tell us what was your experience in the PMBA program as someone from a nonprofit background?
So I would say overall, the experience was excellent. There wasn't many of us that came from this background. In my cohort in particular, it was around a lot of other different disciplines. Overall, my experience was absolutely fantastic. I think it was actually really great to spend time with leaders from other verticals and to really see a different perspective. And we can dive into that a little bit later today, what that perspective kind of brought for me. I think I would also say the structure of the PMBA program through UBC, I had researched all the programs and I felt like it was just far above the rest. There were so many options, especially in your second year, to really specialize and just drill into different areas that I was really interested in, as well as some global opportunities, and other programs didn't necessarily offer that. There was also in my cohort a really good gender balance. It was great to be around a lot of men, women, non-binary folk. So it was actually a really nice balanced space as well.
Okay, that's wonderful. And what would you say were some things that you know now, having finished the program, that you wish you knew before doing the PMBA program?
Yes, I have a few lessons learned that I would definitely share. I think it depends on your background. So you have to remember, if you're taking a business degree, this is very different than the typical master's that people from my background, government, or even like law enforcement, for example, would take. So first of all, you're going to do a lot of math. So that might freak you out. I will say I'm not a highly mathy person. I like finance. I wouldn't say that I enjoy economics and all the other kind of stats and challenging math. So one of the things I could have done that would have helped me was do some of the pre-preparation courses and resources that were sent that I didn't do. There's also some really good resources on the Khan Academy that I definitely, before statistics, should have looked through. The other piece I would say is that there's going to be certain areas you find strengths and certain areas they're going to be so new. And because you're doing it on a professional basis, it means you're going to cram your classes together. So it might be on a Saturday, if that's still the format, and you might at, hour 1 or 2 gotten lost on a concept. You're going to keep going for 8 hours. And so for myself, the key to success was a tutor. So there was just a few topics that were a little bit too far from my clinical therapy background. It was just too brand new. And so I had to recognize that if I'm not going to do this as a full-time MBA, I'm going to need to invest a little bit more. I have a tutor I would recommend to you, but I definitely used a tutor for econ, for some of the complex finance and asset pricing. So some of the things that, at least in my cohort, were requirements in the first year. I will say some of them were very challenging, but really, really important. I think you have to recognize when you're going into a master's degree that's outside of your vertical, you're going to be challenged more. You're going to be around people that have done this in their undergrad. So they're going to know concepts, terminology. They're going to be talking in a language that may not seem as familiar. Don't let that scare you. You'd be surprised the capacity you can have. I think if you have a strong background, strong professional background, and a really good work ethic, I think that you can rise to it. So big lesson learned through it for me was just to do some pre-prep, to definitely engage a tutor. Don't be afraid to do that. I know I wasn't the only person in my MBA that did that. And the last thing I would say is, balance learning from your classmates. So I was lucky to be surrounded by engineers, but it also wasn't their job to get me through some of those challenging classes. And so in the first year, some of them were kind enough to offer peer tutoring and like peer work group sessions. I went to every single one. So you might want to prepare for that it's not just the classes on the weekends, it's not just the homework, that you do need to show up at those study groups. And actually in year 2, when they started to get into classes that was really outside of their realm, I actually offered study groups for them. So we had a creativity class and a few others that I really had some background in. I was able to give back to them. So I think you just have to think in that lens that you may need some help from those that are around you and be prepared to give back to them.
That's amazing. So I hear a lot of these stories about like peer help that are, for me, very inspirational, because people that have expertise in one area are helping their classmates in an area of expertise in another. So that's great to hear. So I think what you've offered in terms of some study tips are extremely valuable. So with some of these concepts for people coming in from like maybe a non-quants background, like it's important to do the pre-study first so that you don't start getting lost as those concepts start to get layered on top of each other. So that was what I was hearing as like a piece of advice, is to like really start to familiarize yourself, if you come from a non-quants background, with some of these basic concepts with a pre-course prep, so that when the concepts start to become more in depth, you don't lose the base. You have the basic concept as a foundation.
Absolutely. I think that's what happens sometimes when you are taking a master's level degree. Remember that this is not an undergrad, it's not an intro level. So when you're taking some of these classes, it's at an elevated level in a language and there's all these acronyms. It really helps you when you come in knowing what those acronyms are. And so then that way you're not getting lost so quickly. The other piece I wanted to mention is when you're a professional MBA, you're not there Monday to Friday the way that the full-time MBAs are. And there's a few things I'd say that I learned in that as well. Number one, you kind of want the school experience. So should everything be going back to in-person in the fall, you definitely want to actually experience the campus a little bit. Otherwise, you just feel like you're kind of way off over here. And so I tried to make my schedule where I went into UBC once every 2 weeks or so. In the weekday, I went to events. I did office hours with some of the teachers. I did some study groups on site. And in the second year, you can join other classes. I actually took classes that were offered in the full-time schedule or the IMBA schedule if that's available. So I would just say that as well. Sometimes you can island a little bit too much in the professional, and it's designed so that you can keep a full-time job. But just remember there's an experience through it. And there is something about being on the campus, being in the solder facilities, actually having those face-to-face connections, and really attending events. I would highly recommend that. Some of the greatest kind of connections and learning points was going to the events that were offered.
Yeah. And on that point, like, how did you find the balance of working full time and then like doing this program, with like extra tutoring and all that kind of stuff? Like, how did you balance that workload? Because I think that's an area of concern for a lot of people where these topic matters are completely new and they're worried about also balancing life and work on top of everything.
Yeah, fair question. I don't think it's for the faint of heart. People have asked me now, would you recommend that again? I always say, well, it depends on your capacity. So for myself, I'm not in a middle management role. I'm in an executive role. So the demands in my professional life and my travel for work is very high. I knew going into it, it would be difficult. I think you have to be ready for that and prepare for that. I don't think you should get scared though and not do it. What you should do, I think, is set your mindset. So in your first year, just be prepared. You will be doing homework every single night. You will. If it's not an area that you're strong in, you'll need time. You're going to be going to classes every few weekends, or if you take some evening classes. So, you're not going to have as much free time. You're really going to have to stay on top of your wellness and pare down other things in your personal life. So I did speak to my family and friends and told them, I'm doing this, I'm doing it, and I'm working. I'm not going to be at every birthday, every anniversary, every wedding, every bar mitzvah. Like, it's just not going to happen. And you guys just need to understand that. So the other thing I did was I actually did a little pre-conversation with my spouse. So if you are in an intimate partnership, you should have a very serious discussion about this, because you won't see them as much. For myself, I actually pre-prepared. I bought birthday gifts and holiday gifts because I just knew I'd be like so busy. I tried to take moments even per week. I had to really carve out time to make sure I was connecting with my spouse. It wasn't all about me. I was actually checking in on them. So that's the one thing I'd say. You will find that challenging. I know some of my cohort colleagues had children. They found it challenging as well. So I think when you do the analysis, if it's important for you to stay in your career, the PMBA is right for you. A lot of people choose to step out of their career for a bit and do full-time, and it's shorter. I think there's value in both. Would I change my decision now? No, I needed to keep progressing, and I have progressed in my current career. I was able to do the MBA on top of it, but be prepared. You're going to fire on all cylinders, and there's going to be times that there's no gas in that tank and you still have like 2 group meetings that night. I will say, the great thing is not just because of COVID, but you're usually around people that are very digitally savvy. And for those of us that are not from the business world, just remember, most from the business world are quick, fast. These are not like long meetings. Like when I came to groups, we would hammer things out in 40 minutes. So I think just being economical was an important piece as well for that balance.
That always sounds like one of the training aspects of a PMBA is being like really economical is a good word to describe it, like economical and efficient with your time, because you don't have a lot of it when you're in the PMBA program. So, you've carved out time for school, you've carved out time for your personal life, and you kind of have to stick to it, you're totally right about like, people are going to see you a little less, but you can still carve out time for people that are important. You're just not going to sit through a 5-hour brunch in those 2 years. You might show up for the first hour and then you got to go, and you have to set expectations with your loved ones and your friends that you're just going to be seen less. But, for everyone's well-being, we always say like, you should still make the time for, your social and support network as well, and make sure that they're on board and they're understanding what it means for you to join this program, because it's always a balancing act when you're in a part-time program, as opposed to, like a full-time program where you basically kind of removed yourself from a professional world for a couple of years to focus on this. A part-time is definitely kind of a balancing act.
Absolutely.
Larissa, what would you say would be the impact that someone with an MBA can have on the nonprofit or non-traditional business sector that they might work for?
Yeah, so I can speak to this, I think, for myself. And I also convinced a few of my colleagues from various fields, including law enforcement, to join the PMBA, much to their chagrin later when it got really hard. But what I would say is that level up is probably the best description of what this can do for you. I think in certain verticals, we actually don't get the real extent of what's available in the business world. So to give you an example from the nonprofit world, we've got some good work, but it's charity-based work, which means we don't have never-ending money to do research and development, to have the most advanced concepts, the most economical ways of looking at things. For example, the term psychological safety, that actually came from the business world, not from another world, such as psychology and others, which is odd, but because the business world is more resourced, you get access to things and to insights, behavioral insights we just don't get in our field. There's ways of doing things. I just learned models that was like, wow, that's easier. That makes sense. That's evidence-based. And I've never seen that model before. So I think that's one, big takeaway for me, was just to be able to expand my thought process. The second thing is you do learn a new language. I think sometimes we think, and if we're from another industry and we're around business professionals, we might go, okay, I think I can sort of hold my own with them in a 10-minute conversation. I would say now, to be able to speak that language, I've watched doors open in significant ways. I've been also able to understand the intentions and the values of my partners that I am constantly working with through my various roles in a much more enriched way. I think before, even from the nonprofit perspective, sometimes there's a few ideas of capitalism or what this looks like or what it doesn't. And when you're really around it inside out, you see a different perspective. And so I think to be able to level up from that degree, the other piece I would say is that those of us in these outside of business world fields, we typically get a very, very light view of things like finance and analysis and evaluation and strategy. We think we have a lot in that. I would just say I discovered there's so much more, and you'd be surprised what you'll end up liking. So for me, I'm not a math person, but I've always loved the management of money. I currently oversee 36 million in assets and a whole bunch of facilities, and I've always enjoyed and done fine with finance. But I think for me, I actually loved the behavioral finance components of understanding how to use capital in a way that can transform the world, and how to do that in a really efficient and really intelligent way to manage charity dollars better is also a really cool piece that I just wasn't expecting to actually really fall in love with it. And now when you look at my bookshelf, all I'm reading is behavioral economics and finance books, because there's just something really fascinating in diving into that a bit deeper. So that was an area, just one area that I zoned in on and really loved and didn't expect, even if some of the classes were a bit tedious. They were a little heavy. There was just a lot to try to dive into. Another, big kind of takeaway I would say is it is about expanding your network. And at first, it might feel a little bit cheesy. And especially if you don't have a LinkedIn account, they get you to get a LinkedIn account and you're like, what is this business, social media, and all the rest? And then it just expands in a really different way. And, your cohort in particular, they do become quite special to you. You go through a lot with that group. To this day, I regularly connect with my cohort. I didn't expect that. I actually had a lot of friends going in. I didn't think I had any space. And I've actually walked away with a few best friends. I didn't expect that, really, from different verticals. And so even that, to be exposed to people you normally wouldn't, huge takeaway, also a huge door opener. It's pretty cool for me now in my role. I've been doing cross collaboration. So I'll give you an example. One of my close friends is a data scientist, and he actually has supported a research project that I'm currently conducting through my nonprofit. And he's offering his data analysis skills to just check through our methodology. And so for him, it's so meaningful to contribute to something. And for me to have access to a person like that, what a cool collaboration. And I've also been kind of supporting something he's working on in a different angle as well. So those are just things you don't expect, and it will happen. Every cohort I've met, they've built these unique connections. So for those of us who don't play in these fields very much, those connections are invaluable to you.
Yeah, that's incredible, like to get that type of expertise, like, in the nonprofit, dollars are short in nonprofit world. So to get that type of expertise in, like, normally you'd have to pay a consulting firm like many, many dollars to get that type of methodology support and data analytics support. But you got that basically through a friend connection. And another thing that I hear is that, you could bounce your business ideas off of your classmates, and they all come from these different types of backgrounds and have expertise in different business areas. So it's almost like having your own consulting firm, like in your classroom of experts in their own areas, and they would, utilize your expertise in your area of expertise as well to complement what they do. So it's really quite interesting, the collaborations that can go through, and it's also couched in this kind of community of friendship. Which is really amazing, because it's kind of a safe space for you to build these connections, for you to bounce ideas off of and see what these experts in these different areas feel about certain ideas, or what improvements they might suggest.
Yeah, you know what? Your own consulting firm is exactly what it feels like. You also need to be prepared to give that back. And the thing is, from our unique perspectives, we're actually in high demand for this group. So although I've actually been regularly supporting, consulting, designing with some of my colleagues, some that are in real estate development, there's some that are in engineering, mining, forestry, kind of some of the STEM area. especially for myself, I work quite closely on social impact projects and being able to contribute to things that they're looking at. I was actually helping someone do some accounting, auditing, and talking through some of the ethical components around working with vulnerable populations and coming into communities with vulnerable populations. And again, that's just not something they would have to pay a consultant, thousands of dollars. It's not in their network. So we have something to offer as well.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that input that, people from non-traditional sectors like nonprofit, governance, law enforcement, what was the kind of the value added of thinking that was so valuable to your classmates?
I mean, the feedback that I received, I was just meeting with a colleague the other day working on a startup that's from the cohort. And he was saying to me, and I've heard this a few times, he said, you always just brought a different lens that was usually a little bit richer psychologically, a little bit richer in community and environmental understanding, broader in scope, or really bringing something to the table that is just not part of the conversation. I definitely found the more I was exposed to the business world, it's a really diverse, really layered, well-researched vertical. But on the other hand, it's a bit siloed too. It's kind of in its own world, especially in Canada and the US. There's certain frameworks, certain capitalist and other frameworks that it operates out of. And there's many of us that bring something different. So I remember for myself, in my day-to-day, I don't go to meetings that don't start with a land acknowledgement, a pronoun circle, and other, certain kinds of practices. And I remember coming into the business classes and none of those things were happening. I think that number one, we bring something interesting. And, when I started was over 3 years ago almost. So the world has changed a lot in those 3 years. I think there's a greater awareness, but we bring something to the business vertical and the business field. I think we also, some of us, our roles require a different engagement of emotional intelligence. I know for myself, it's actually in my job description to do emotional debriefing with my team members who work in really kind of complex or challenging areas. And so I've developed certain skills. Those of us in nonprofit, we have many skills. You don't get to specialize. You don't have executive assistants. You're doing HR, you're doing strategy, you're doing program design, you're doing finance. And so it was actually really interesting, I think, for my colleagues, for me to bring that to them. Most of them were very specialized. They'd only worked in marketing. They'd only been in, middle management level. They'd only kind of had this. They hadn't had a diversity of experience. Most of us from outside that field, including my colleagues in government and law enforcement, they've done different things. They've jumped around different roles. So when they look at a perspective, they've got more than one thought or one kind of perspective to bring. So I think that's a unique piece that I think my classmates really noticed. And you do a lot of group work, and at first everybody always migrates to whoever is just like you. So all the engineers will go together, all these individuals from a certain cultural background. The great thing is people like us, we shake that up, because all of a sudden projects get diverse and you need diverse perspectives and voices. So I kind of became the ethics person, even though I have a lot more that I bring to the table. I've worked in ethics a lot. I have a really, really formed sense of our human rights code and all of that in BC. So I kept getting asked to join projects because I just brought something the group didn't have. In the second year, you start to choose courses that are a little bit more kind of diverse. And so I was in a course that primarily looked at the ethics of diversity hiring. And no one in my class had ever had experience with that except for myself. And so to be able to, we did actually live debate in that. And, it was really interesting to be the one that everybody wanted on their team. Whereas maybe in the first year in statistics, that wouldn't have been the case.
But you gave back. Yes. I think the areas that you're mentioning right now, those are at the forefront of business research. There's a lot of talk about the great resignation after COVID-19, and that's a major topic of concern. And it's not about dollars and cents anymore. There's a lot more about employee behavior and human resources that are couched in how people feel. Right? So it's about emotional intelligence in making business decisions and organizational decisions. So that is really at the forefront of business right now, is these economic factors that are not just about dollars and cents. It's about human behavior and emotional intelligence in making business decisions.
And I think that was part of my attraction to the UBC program in particular, is I really saw a commitment, and the Dillon Ethics Center, and now there's some future work happening on responsible leadership, that there was a lot of welcome space for the inputs around diversity, equity, and inclusion, around psychological safety, around what it looks like to really invest and support workplaces that have a triple bottom line. So people, planet, profit, not just profit. And so there was a lot of space for that kind of thinking. I will say there was times it challenged classmates. I was definitely around people, and no disrespect, they had worked in a very structured system, a business system, and they're doing some unlearning. And so I think that people like us also do a little bit of a shakeup. I think at first I was surprised how different my perspective was. I thought it would be similar. It wasn't at all. But I think when you have a mature and respectful group, which the PMBA tends to be, because they're typically already established leaders in some kind of industry, you've really got some space to have some awesome, challenging learning lab type conversations. So I think it was a great space for that. It still is, actually.
Yeah, and the conversations kind of continue. You know, like you still collaborate with your classmates and you continue to learn from each other and challenge each other's like established views and see where there's opportunities for adapting and refining and being more inclusive in anybody's view, whether you're from nonprofit or from like a very structured business sector.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, can I ask like what key points would you advise applicants from a nonprofit governance background to think about when they're considering the decision to do a PMBA?
Absolutely. I mean, it kind of comes back to my first point, but are you ready to level up? I think sometimes people have this idea to get the letters is what it's about, right? Just get that MBA or just get something behind my name. I just want to challenge you to go beyond that and go, am I ready to level up? Do I want to give more to my industry? I think when you also make it all about just trying to work towards your next promotion, it actually affects the kind of classes, the kind of learning. You end up kind of getting really focused on grades, and all of that's actually very distracting. So my challenge to you is, what kind of leader do you want to be? Could this contribute to you being a purpose-driven and excellent leader? For many of us, we could take a master's in our field. So for me, people are shocked I didn't take a master's in social work, a master's in nonprofit leadership. My colleague, they were shocked that she wouldn't get a justice-related degree as a law enforcement officer. But you have to keep in mind, we've been studying that and practicing that our whole lives. This is a unique opportunity to shift a little bit and to add some layers and some texture to what you have to offer. I know this morning I was meeting with one of my supervisors, and he said, you have leveled up, you have grown in a way, it's actually surpassed even my need for supervision for you, because you've just built much more of a well-rounded component. You know how to pitch something to multiple people. You know how to analyze and how to properly, make a case for something, and to really bring it to life in a really kind of smart and layered way. And I appreciated that, because I think that was the biggest difference that I saw. Are you ready to texture? Are you ready to be able to add more tools to your arsenal as a leader? The other thing I would say is that there's a lot of research around the need for the generalist leader. There is so much pressure to become specialized. And in fact, I don't know if I like the term, but I'm considered a subject matter expert in Canada on 2 areas. And I even testify in criminal court, based on some of those levels of expertise. And I'll be honest with you, that hasn't been super helpful to my career. I'm sure it's impressive. I guess it is. It's not that helpful.
Really?
It is much better to be a generalist leader, meaning that your specialty is leadership and that you are actually able to understand and oversee multiple areas. Because as you grow in leadership, you're going to oversee the finance manager, and you're going to oversee the HR advisor, and the marketing specialist, and whatever else you might have in your organization. You can't effectively supervise people if you don't have at least a base framework for their work and what are the benchmarks that they should be reaching. And very often, many of us are supervising people that we just don't. We're like so thankful they're the policy analyst. We're so thankful they're the, digital analyst. And we don't really even know how they actually do their job, nor could we actually give them good feedback and leadership. And so I think that's the other thing I'd say is, are you ready to grow? And this is a generalist degree. That's the thing to realize. You can definitely zone in on some specializations, and I did. So I walked away with definitely an ESG focus, environment, social, and governance focus. But it is still a generalist degree, and I think that's a great thing. The world needs very textured and very fulsome leaders, and it gives you a chance to also have some vertical to career and career hop. I think when you get more and more specialized, it's really difficult. Government, nonprofit, it's difficult to jump anywhere else. I think the MBA is key to opening those opportunities for you.
Those are such important points. There's so much to unpack in like what you just said there. Like A is just like, as you move into leadership positions, even if you're in like kind of a, what you would call like a niche kind of industry, like nonprofit or governance, like soon you will be managing people that are in different subject matter areas, right? Like accounting or finance, and you'd need to be able to speak and understand their own language. That's like a really fundamental part of being a good leader, is understanding where those people are coming from, at least kind of a fundamental basis of what their work is like, right? Like you've read a financial statement before, you kind of know, you're not the expert in it, but you know where they're coming from. You know what their major concerns are. You can speak their language, and you can therefore manage this person more effectively and build a better collaborative relationship, more so than if you had no clue where they're coming from. So understanding all these different verticals is so important to having a good relationship with the people that you're going to lead in the future. So that's definitely a very important point, Larissa, that you make. Just your effectiveness as a future leader. And then also like another point that I always get with people coming from like specialized disciplines, like governance or, public policy or another social science, is they tend to have this idea that I'm comfortable with this, I'm going to specialize in this. And that's good. Like if you just want to be specialized in one niche area, that's fine. I can understand why you would want to like specialize in what you're passionate about, but I always want to challenge people with those perceptions. Like think beyond, like just specializing in an area that you already know. Think about what your area of your area of expertise, whether it's public policy or governance or nonprofit, what is the skill set that is most needed in that sector? And often you'll find it's those business skills, because everybody is kind of afraid, and rightly so. It's scary, right? Like it was probably scary for you to like consider an MBA, and then once you saw how much work it was, you probably had moments where you're like, did I like bite off more than I can chew, right? Like you have to challenge yourself to be resilient and be brave enough and courageous enough to actually tackle those subject matters that you don't know, because very likely it's that area that is missing from your industry. If you yourself as an area expert are afraid to broach those subject matters because it's the unknown for you, it's very likely that that's the skill set that is most needed in your sector. And it's most needed for you to consider this because you are your own subject matter, right? You don't want to parachute someone else in to do this work that doesn't understand the industry. So to become, to be a subject area expert, but also to expand your own skill set with these types of fundamental business skills that are key to leading in any organization, just helps your industry and your cause even more if you can challenge yourself to acquire these new skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree. I think it makes you a more competitive candidate. So if you are also wanting to grow in your career position wise, I always say there's different kinds of, vertical and horizontal growth. Regardless, it does make you more competitive the more well-rounded you are. And we do need leaders in this world that are generalists. And I think that you do spend the first year doing a lot of the fundamentals. And some of them, if you're not quantitatively focused, you're not going to find them fun. So just prepare for that. This is a discipline. Remember that a master's degree means you've spent a certain amount of hours to build a mastery in something. So if you don't even have the underground foundation for it, yeah, it's going to be a little bit challenging. I think though, if you are a professional that has been accelerating in your career, you already know, the grit and resilience it takes to get there. So don't talk yourself out of the challenge, talk yourself in. I think there's a famous, just lean into it. be prepared that sometimes it's going to be hell. But you've done that before. You've managed it. It's just a hell that's kind of new sometimes. And I think the other part is, don't go into it just kind of thinking you can figure out your shortcuts. The best thing you can do is set your boundaries, let your community know you're not available, and then spend all your time learning about stats. Like, don't phone it in, because it does go quickly when you're in the PMBA. You got to move through these concepts and bam, exams and on to the next class. And there's just quite a few topics that later, the ones you do find the hardest are often the ones you need to learn. And so don't phone those in, like press in as much as you can, and then try to build them. That was the other thing I learned is, as we started, we kind of got our strategy, our leadership, and then we kind of added in marketing and statistics and finance and econ, and we just kept going. I tried to take the concepts and move them along with me. And so it was actually really helpful. Even all the accounting classes came in handy quite a bit in the other classes. And so if you're paying attention, if you're zoning in, for myself, I made lots of flashcards. I made whiteboard, messes to try to make connections between it. I listened to books on tape, especially if I was commuting or driving, trying to cram a little more information in there. You have to expose yourself. So just think about that as an immersion, that I don't think someone should walk away with a master's degree if you have not built a level of mastery. And so, be prepared. Imagine if you were trying to learn the violin and play a full classical piece by the end of 2 years to full level. Imagine how much practicing you'd have to do. So give it that same attention.
Yeah, I really like that phrase. I think you just coined a new catchphrase. Don't talk yourself out of a challenge, talk yourself in. That's probably something that all leaders need to consider, because you will be challenged in leadership roles. So like, this is a big practice board for you to build these connections and walk yourself out of your comfort zone, because eventually, if it's not through something like this, it's going to be through something else, and you'll make a whole lot more mistakes without these skills and without the network to kind of help support you through it. So I think that's a great one to consider. Larissa, you mentioned that you had taken advantage of, the UBC community itself by taking courses outside the business school. So I think that's one thing I've always mentioned to people, that 1/3 of your degree, up to 1/3 of your degree, can be taken with departments outside of the business school. So you can take advantage of this world-class kind of academic community at UBC through your elective spaces. So Larissa, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about those courses that you took.
So this was like a huge highlight. I really loved the courses at Sauder. There's really, really good ones. And like I said, if you can also in the second year take some in the full-time schedule, there's more courses open to you. But I actually think I was the person in my cohort who took the most credits outside the business school. I went to the Global Public Policy School, which is right next door. I took a law course, and I also took a few rehabilitative sciences courses. So like in healthcare, because that fits my work quite a bit. And I have to say, those added so much richness. So for example, I took a class that was primarily on power. Understanding power structures, how that integrates, what does responsible power look like? It was one of the highlights for me. And actually, I ended up bringing it back to a project that I did in a solder class. And I also got a few of my colleagues who had never even had exposure to that kind of leadership conversation. They actually took that class later on when it was offered. I also used, one of my rehabilitative sciences classes, I used it to design a program that I recently got funded through BC Housing, a multi-million-dollar project. I designed the whole thing, and I did it through a class and learn new tools to do that. It's my vertical for sure. So I think that's one thing to know, is that you're not going to spend all your time doing something that's just so foreign to you. The other part I mentioned to you, Vivian, when we were chatting, is I took advantage of every special opportunity. So I went to any special training classes or certificates that were offered. I went and checked out the consulting group, the creative destruction lab. And then I actually went on the GNAM and the summer study abroad. I don't know, Vivian, if you want to explain those first, and then I can tell you what I did. You'd probably explain it better than I would.
Yeah, for sure. So like the GNAM network, so the Global Network of Advanced Management, is this network of 30 top business schools around the world, spearheaded by Yale. And in spring and fall of every year, they offer these global network weeks, and each institution will offer their own network week. So they usually have a regional or institutional bent to them. Like UBCs run their own network weeks on sustainable development goals. Berkeley, for example, has run them on Bay Area innovation and entrepreneurship. Yale has run them on the behavioral science of management. So they usually have some kind of regional or institutional bent to them. And they do come back as elective credits towards your MBA. So these are often in person, but obviously with COVID, they all moved to online. So every year there's what in a normal year, there'll be a mix of in-person weeks and then online, small online network courses. And then your study abroad program is like like what you would normally do in your undergrad. Many of you will be familiar with this. So this is when you actually go to one of our, I think, 35 different exchange partners around the world and like do a course there and then have that credited back towards your MBA. And those are as short as 2 weeks abroad up to like several weeks abroad. So normally, of course, they'd be done abroad, but during COVID, of course, the courses are again offered online. So Larissa, I believe you had quite a bit of experience with those programs.
Yes, I took advantage of all of them. Because of COVID, I wasn't able to go in person, but I still signed up for all of them. And I have to say they were a huge highlight. I actually took the ones through UBC, the ones you were talking about. There was a really good one on COVID-19 and resilience. It was excellent, so relevant for the time, run by one of the best instructors in the world. I also took another one on sustainable development goals, economic resilience, ecological resilience was so cool because there's so much work at UBC happening on that. And then I actually was supposed to go in person, but ended up doing it online. I actually went to the Cologne School of Business, and it was excellent. USAID, I believe it's called. And I did a course on leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was a course I mentioned a little bit earlier. We actually did live debate. I love live debate. And so it was nice to get that integrated with a different teacher. A group of us actually from UBC did it together. So that was really nice. And then we met all these other students from all over the world. I would say, if you're going to do this program, this is a highlight. Be prepared to sign up and to do those. Put a little money aside because you do have to pay to fly there and all the rest. Totally worth it. Quite a few of my colleagues also, they did some really interesting ones like German automotive analysis, and one went to Italy to learn the best of Italy and Italian businesses. I tried to sign up for that one and I didn't get it, but there's some really cool topics. There's also some really more technical topics if that's what you're looking for. The ones that are the most competitive are going to be the Harvard and Yales and all the rest. So it depends if that's what you want. It does give you some additional certificates to put on LinkedIn if that's what matters to you. But I would actually say, even the ones that are not the top billed ones, like I got all of my choices because I think those of us from the outside fields, we're going to be attracted to the topics that are a little bit different. And so I would highly recommend that. Added so much richness to this opportunity. And one other thing I want to mention, I haven't even told you this, Vivian, but I think that your PMBA is what you make it. And so for myself, I actually made a point to build relationships with my instructors. So connecting with them, going to events that they were running, going to lectures they were offering, or, offering to support different projects. And one of the things that came out of it with one of my colleagues, we actually launched a research project, which is still running. And so we launched the very first research project of its kind called Ethical Storytelling in Corporate Social Responsibility. We actually received a grant from the UBC Dillon Center, and we've been running it ever since. It's with Dr. Darren Dahl, which I'm very lucky to get a chance to do that with him. And so we're actually planning to be publishing later this year. So there's opportunities. I actually was also able to do some of that research for credit. You can do directed studies. You have to put a proposal together. You do have to have an instructor that is amenable to that. I actually did 2 directed studies. So I had the research project, which counted for some credits, although it's kind of a bigger project than school. I also did a behavioral finance directed study with Dr. Ron Giammarino. And we did that because there just wasn't a course available that was really in my interest set. And, I don't think I want to promise him to other people, but what I'll say is if you do build a relationship, there's a lot of instructors and teachers that are interested themselves to dive into something different they don't always teach on. And they have sometimes resources you would just never have a chance to access. And so we actually created our own course, and we did that for 6 months. And it was transformative. I'm running a finance project with the UN. And that was transformative to the work that I've been doing with the UN. So there's other opportunities. I think it's what you make out of it. And so if you're someone that is resourceful and someone that is strategic and building relationships, there's more opportunities than you think.
That's incredible, Larissa. I didn't even know you were doing so much. You really leverage absolutely everything you can. with this program and with your busy schedule as well. Like these research projects and these directed courses are amazing. And, it's kind of assisted you with your work in the UN and other places. So that's amazing to hear, like the research faculty, the faculty that you're working with, they're among some of the best in the world in the cutting edge of research and business. So for you to contribute to that as a student and as an alumna is incredible. So I think that's all the questions that I have for you. I'm just going to see if there's any questions from the audience. If the audience members have any questions, feel free to use the raise hand feature or the chat box. Otherwise, I'm always available for if you have any questions about the program. I think there's a question from Naveen. So let's see.
Yeah.
Naveen, go ahead.
Thanks, Vivian. Yeah, thanks, Larissa, for sharing this. This is really great to learn about this unique. Like, I didn't have any idea about like MBA can have like these type of career options also. This is very unique. And apologies for like not sharing my camera because due to my second shot, I'm a little sick and I'm on sick leave today.
No
So,
problem.
yeah. So just I think you already touched upon it. Like one general question, right? Like you said, MBA is so grilling, right? You have so many like assignments, and then you have networking events and a lot of projects you have to do. Any tips, right, you want to share?
Yeah, no, I have a few for sure. The first is talk to your workplace and ask for flexibility in your schedule. So that doesn't mean less hours, but I actually talked to mine. I'm in a role that I was able to set my own schedule anyways, but I moved it around so that sometimes if I knew I had a study group till like midnight, that I could start 2 hours later the next day, or I could flex some time here and do a little something on the weekend. So I think that's the first thing I'd say is actually try to negotiate a little bit more flexibility in your work schedule if you have a pretty structured job. So that's, I think, the first one. The second, I had mentioned, pare down what's going on outside of work. So even I did a lot of volunteering. I am the person that shows up at all the family events. I have an Italian family, and so you're expected to be at everything. And so I had a chat with all of them, just talked about it, really kind of sold them the vision of why I wanted to do it. I am the first person in my whole family to have a master's degree. So they were so cheering me on and so excited. And then please, if you have an intimate partner, speak to your partner or your spouse and negotiate that with them. I think that's going to be some sanity. And then the last thing is also to decide how many opportunities do you want to do? So for myself, in the first year, there was no way I was going to take summer classes. There was no way. After all the stats and all that, I was just like, absolutely not. I needed 4 weeks to just be off and just rest, recoup, and come back ready to go in September. So I think you have to know that. The second year, because I was doing courses that were more in my vertical, I didn't feel that same. So I pushed all the way through. I did school literally for about 1.5 years because we got some extra time with COVID. And I was fine with that. I really felt like I had the steam. So just know that. I think the opportunities are good. I know a few of my colleagues, they did the traveling. They ended up coming back pretty exhausted because they used their work holidays for that. So then they didn't have any other holidays and they were doing school 8 hours a day still. So, just think about that. And then the last thing I want to say is that, I graduated with a really high GPA. I'm in, the top 10 or 15% of my cohort, but I had a few really low grades in there. I didn't get kicked out, but let's just say some of them was a smidge close because some classes were just so far from my knowledge set. But you do have to let go of the grades at some point. I think give your best, but you realize that like a year in, that there's just going to be people, first of all, that are so good at this. This is the only area they've worked. They're getting 90s on everything. So don't compare. It's not fair. And the second is, what do you really want to get out of it? A lot of my cohort colleagues, they chose not to graduate because of COVID. Some of us got some extra time. They're doing another year of their MBA. I don't think the graduation, the grade, the letters is what everything is about. I think it's important. I've noticed, for some of my career opportunities, people are impressed by the MBA, but it's not what got me in the door. What got me in the door is being able to articulate concepts, being able to speak to multiple disciplines, being a really strong generalist leader. So you got to let the other stuff go because I think it drives you crazy. And I think it takes away from the true learning. All you're doing is just climbing and climbing for grades. Whereas wouldn't it be better to get 75% in something, but you really got it? And then you can now apply it going forward, because you'll have classes that you'll knock out of the park. So you'll balance your average back up to the 82 to 86 or whatever. That's kind of the ideal range. You'll get there. Almost all of my cohort colleagues did. I think, though, sometimes we let it be a barrier. So that would be the last piece of advice I'd give, Naveen. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, totally. Thanks. Yeah, that helps. Thank you, Larissa.
You're so
That's
welcome.
amazing. Thanks so much, Larissa. Letting go of the perfectionism is definitely something that is a challenge that most PMBA students have to get through, because you all come to the program as like A types, whether the variations in your personalities, whether you're introvert or extrovert, you're all ambitious and you have high expectations of yourself, but you're also balancing a lot. So that last piece of advice, to let go of perfectionism and see the bigger picture of where you're going, so long as you get there, you know, like even if it's riding a little close, sometimes you have chances to bring it back up, which is, you know, definitely there. So letting go of perfectionism is definitely something that is a great piece of advice. Yeah, so I don't see, are there any final questions before we let Larissa go to her busy day? Okay, I don't see anything else right now. I'd just like to thank everyone for coming today, and then just note again that, you know, I'm always available for questions. If you have questions about the program, Larissa, I'm sure you can be reached on LinkedIn if others have some questions that they'd like to pose with you directly. And thanks again for everyone to join this conversation and to learn more about what it is to join the PMBA program from a different background. Like, I think this is a very important discussion. I always get questions from people from non-business backgrounds that are almost like they're interested in leveling up, but they are like, you know, pulled back by the myth that it's only for people from business backgrounds. So I would love to encourage everyone that's considering leveling up to consider the PMBA program. It doesn't matter what background you're from. You could be from a business background, you could be from your traditional engineering background, or you could be from a nonprofit background. You could be, you know, an art history grad, or you could be a social science grad or humanities grad, an English grad. This program can add value to what you are doing, and it can add value to your career. You just have to be prepared for it. You know, you have to, more so than others sometimes, have to challenge yourself to, you know, walk into the challenge, but not walk away, like, you know, challenge yourself to grow and walk out of your comfort zone. And I think the benefits would be immense in the end. So thank you again to Larissa and everyone for joining us, and hope you have a great rest of day and rest of summer. Hope to see everyone again soon in person.
Thank you.
Thank you.